Hello, I'm Robert, volunteer fact checker and helping if you're scared of many things. And this is to cover something which I should have stressed before, and I really must stress very clearly, because it's natural for when you're scared to hope after hope that, oh, well, this will actually be a ceasefire, and then if there's a possibility of one, then to just hope there will be one on that particular day, exactly as it seems, that there won't be any glitches. And it's great to hope for that, great to wish for that, but please don't rely on that. So very important not to rely on that, to recognize that this is something that it might take many attempts before it goes across the line. And each one it's an attempt. It's not yet a ceasefire until it's a ceasefire. So it can take a very long time. I'm not saying this is going to take that long, but when in 1969, when I was 15, that's when the trouble started in Northern Ireland, and they regularly you'd get news stories about people having various ideas about how to solve it, but it went on and on and on. Essentially, terrorism in the United Kingdom, in between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. It was between Protestants in Northern Ireland and the Catholics in the rest of Ireland, and it just went on and on and on until eventually it was when I was 44 that they eventually signed the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I'm not saying this is going to go on for decades, but it's just to give you an idea that it does take a lot of time to solve a complex problem. And there were numerous attempts to solve it, and that was relatively small. But for larger conflicts, they tend to take a few years, Vietnam War, Korean War, to go through all the different attempts to stop it. But some of them take a long time. For instance, between Hezbollah and Israel took a very long time. Eventually, it took eliminating Hezbollah before the ceasefire could be agreed. So I can't see this going on for years and years and years and years, but it could certainly go on for months, or possibly longer. So it just means that this round of attempts will last longer, and it's lasted a bit longer already and may last longer still. So that's the main thing. And then I've talked in my previous video about what might be holding it up, so I won't do that now. And I just want to look at the what's it called on the yes, here we are. So this is Putin's decision tree. So first of all, when Zelensky meets on Monday, then when Zelensky meets with Trump, then whatever the sticking point is, it might be that Zelensky can see a way to agree to it. After all, that's the whole point. So we don't know what it is. If it is that the requirement is to actually cede land legally to Russia, then Zelensky will have to say, no, I can't do that, but I can agree to try and resolve any issues peacefully and not to fight anymore. And any territorial claims have to be done through peaceful methods. And so then that would mean that de facto that Russia is in charge of the occupied Ukraine, and then Ukraine will keep saying to Russia, can you please hand that land over to us? It really belongs to us. And Russia will say no, well, we consider it belongs to us, and then that will continue for decades. But so what's the point in that? Why would they do that rather than just hand it over legally to Russia? The reason is because they maintain their claim on it. And so eventually Putin he'll die eventually. There may be another Russian government, there might be a change of government, there might be a change of ideas there, and at some point then it might be that they can reunify Ukraine. So that's the start of it. So then Zelensky, as I explained in the first video, Zelensky just actually can't give the land to Russia, and it's extremely it's impossible that even after 6 months, when they can actually do a referendum and actually get the Ukrainian people and ask them to vote to give it Ukraine to Russia, they're never going to do it for exactly the same reason. They want to keep the claim on the land. They want to keep the legal claim, even though they know they can't have it. So there's no way that Zelensky, even if he wanted to give the land to Russia, there's no way he actually can. So this is a sticking point. So, or whatever it is, most likely it pops down to here, and then Trump, after lots of talk to Zelensky and Europe, and probably going on for some days of that, and Trump eventually would say, well look, they're not going to move. I don't really understand why, but they're not going to move. So he tells Putin that his demands are impossible, and then he puts a reasonable alternative to Putin. He says, well, look, Putin, they're just not going to do that, but they do agree not to fight to get the land back from you. Is this something you can accept as an alternative to them actually legally ceding it to you, just promising not to fight to get it back? And then that's then over to Putin and see what he says. So then Putin might say, okay, I can accept that compromise, then we have a ceasefire. Or he says, no, I can't accept that compromise, then Putin keeps fighting. And it may seem a niggling little thing, but there's actually nothing Zelensky can do about it. If Putin can't accept that compromise, there's nothing Zelensky can do from his part. So Putin would keep fighting. But remember, all this is about is Putin stopping fighting. So it's not about giving Putin giving anything to Ukraine. So then Putin keeps fighting. So now Trump has he's already threatened he's going to threaten China with the secondary sanctions unless they stop buying Russian oil. So there are two possibilities: that they defy him, but that doesn't seem likely to happen. India already seems they will make diplomatic protests, but in practice they'll probably stop buying the Russian oil if he threatens them with tariffs. So then what happens next? Well, Putin's army gradually runs out of money, but that would take 200 days or more, and that's just the ready cash, and then there'll be other things they could sell to keep going further. But Putin has shown he's very sensitive to even just very small reductions in the just the possibility of the money running out that goes into the pockets of the government and then the oligarchs, and that this might come to a stop sort of a bit later this year. Then this is something he gets very nervous about. He just doesn't want that to happen. So it's well possible that Trump gets India and China and Brazil, another one of the main importers, to stop buying Russian oil, and then Putin might come back really quite quickly after that and say, oh, I've given a bit more time to think about this, and actually that's not such an unreasonable agreement after all, and that I'm willing to accept that so long as they promise not to fight me, then to take over the land, they don't actually need to sign a bit of paper to give it to Russia, and they can just sign a treaty in which they promise not to fight me, but not actually legally give me the land. So then Putin chooses peace, hooray. If not, well, Putin raises taxes from the Russians. He's not going to want to do that though, because it'll impact the economy. And then and he keeps fighting, but suppose he does, then Ukraine gets new capabilities or levers, and Putin chooses peace, hooray. They find another way to persuade him, and then Putin chooses peace. Now let's look at the very worst case. So this is something that I realized since talking to people about this, that we do have to look at the worst case, and we have to explain that it is a possible scenario. So remember that in the UK, the conflicts in Northern Ireland, the Troubles, they continued from when I was 15 to when I was 44. So now what we could have is just a frozen conflict, where all the fighting stops in practice, but there's no missiles being fired, and and they maybe do now some kind of agreement to stop fighting. Maybe they don't, and they just lob the occasional shell across, but everybody knows it's completely pointless because the front line is completely stuck. So that's a worst case scenario. That's not the worst case scenario. So one scenario is that they just run out of, what's the point in fighting, because it gets to the point where neither side is moving at all, and then they just say, well, we're not even going to try and cross the front line anymore. And so then eventually the fighting slows down, and they occasionally lob missiles across at each other, but there doesn't seem to be any point in it. So that's one possibility. And another possibility is that it just continues, and so Russia continues to fire its cruise missiles at Ukraine. Ukraine builds more and more air defenses to try and stop them. Ukraine keeps trying to hit the bombers on the Russian side that are dropping these missiles on Ukraine, and tries to hit the factories that are making the drones and so on. And so that might just continue indefinitely. So that could continue for a few years. This is another worst case scenario. And the conflicts. So I'm going to talk let's talk about that just now. The conflict. So I'll just add that in this, but it's not too much. No, I'll do that secondly. And that's my next video. I'll explain how it could get completely stuck. So then eventually Ukraine might be able to use its military psychological levers, which is, again, that's something I can talk about in a future video. I'll talk about that in a future video. So the main thing is that the worst case here is that it's just a frozen conflict with neither side fighting anymore, because what's the point? Or they continue to fire missiles back and forth, but they achieve absolutely nothing with those missiles. And again, they might start firing fewer missiles when it has absolutely no effect, and that just continues for years. So that would be the equivalent of the troubles in Northern Ireland. It would probably transition to be rather lower intensity and then just keep going. And so that would be like a worst case scenario here, where there's no ceasefire, there's no peace deal. It's just constant fighting, but the fighting gets less and less, and there's just Russia gives up trying to take any of Ukraine, and Ukraine gives up trying to take any of Russia. Another possibility is, a worst case scenario, is that Russia very slowly edges, and so Russia has the aim of taking Pokrovsk, which is a small city in East Donbass, and then over a period of maybe 3-4 years, it could take that fortress belt. So look at the fortress belt. Here we go, the fortress belt. So that's the fortress belt that we saw before. So this is Pokrovsk, and it's that's the detail of the entire map of Ukraine. It's a very, very small area. That red bit is this bit, and this is a little bit within it. So Russia might, if Russia keeps fighting at the current rate, then the experts seem to think that it might be able to take Pokrovsk in maybe before the end of this year. It might be. It's impossible to say, because the fightings get more and more difficult as time goes on, and it's extremely difficult for either side to do anything now. So it might just stop completely. Russia hasn't taken anywhere big since Sudza is the biggest place it's taken for a long time. That's just 5,000 in peacetime, and Pokrovsk is quite a bit larger than that. So does it give the population? It's no, I can't remember the population. But anyway, so if the war does continue, this is another worst case scenario, is that Russia just keeps fighting very, very slowly. By the end of this year, it's managed to creep around Pokrovsk, and that's just a few kilometers. The whole area of Pokrovsk is about 100 square kilometers, 10 by 10. So it managed to push about an extra 10 kilometers like that. It cuts off the supply to Pokrovsk, and then it is able to take over Pokrovsk. Then Russia might achieve that by the end of this year, just possibly. The experts that I follow, they don't think that Russia is anywhere near being able to take the fortress belt, and so that would be a multi-year campaign. and it might take them, till the end of this decade. Eventually, they might take over the fortress belt. So that would be a worst case scenario, where Russia very, very slowly over the rest of this decade takes Pokrovsk, and then it takes the fortress belt, and then eventually take the entire Donetsk Oblast and reach the borders of Donetsk, and little bits of Luhansk that it hasn't got yet. And then once it's done that, then it's in a much stronger position to travel into Ukraine, but hopefully by then Ukraine has got significantly strengthened and been able to stop them. But anyway, that's the worst case, okay? I don't expect that to happen, but please, it is important to recognise what the worst case is. It is not nuclear war. I've talked about that before. There's no way that a guy who's used to this sort of standard of living, and who sees luxury as of great importance, who's very averse to any form of risk that there might be to his luxurious lifestyle and to his regime. He doesn't want to take even the slightest risk to any of this. So this guy is not going to be using nukes. He never will. So that's it. Where was I again? Yeah, at the end. Okay, so in my next video, then what I'm going to talk about is policing the ceasefire. So anyway, that's Putin's decision tree, and so you can see that there. And then the next video I'll talk about this bit about about the ceasefire and how that's going to work. So, okay, you can see this in the look. I'll put the link to this in the video description, and hope this helps you. And any questions, do say.